Welcome to How I Raised It, the podcast that goes behind the scenes with entrepreneurs who've raised capital. We uncover the tips, tricks, and techniques they use to get investors to write a check. Strap in and turn it up.
Hi, welcome to another episode of How I Raised It, produced by foundersuite.com. Today I have Jack Beuttell of Kunoa. How's it going there, Jack?
Very well. How are you?
I'm very good. So where are you physically located right now?
I'm in Chinatown in Honolulu, Hawaii.
In Chinatown. Oh yeah, cool. Is it still a pretty vibrant Chinatown community, or is it more tourist these days?
It's actually pretty vibrant, pretty original. It is a part of town that's revitalizing. So you're seeing a lot of new restaurants and kind of fashion shops pop up, but it still has a lot of its original character.
And how long have you been in Hawaii?
I moved here, just about 4 years ago to launch Kunoa.
Awesome. So let's get to it. What is Kunoa?
Kunoa is a vertically integrated Hawaii meat company, which means that we have ranching operations on the island of Kauai. We own and operate the state's largest meat processing facility on Oahu, and we market our products under the Kunoa brand.
Awesome. So the cattle are actually on Kauai, and then is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. So we run about 2,000 head of cattle on 5,000 leased acres, and we raise those animals to sort of their slaughter weight, and then we ship them to Oahu, to our processing facility. We also work with ranchers across the state, more than 70 producers from whom we buy cattle. So Big Island, Maui, Kauai, Oahu. We're an aggregation platform, so we pull those animals from all the neighbor islands and bring them here to Oahu to process.
And where did you come up with the idea to create a vertically integrated meat company in Hawaii?
Yeah, well, I can't take credit for it. It sort of fell in my lap, and it was too good to pass up. So my partner, Bobby Frias, he's a third-generation rancher from Kauai. He has been in this for a long time. It's his passion, and there are kind of some interesting dynamics with the livestock industry in Hawaii that he's been wrestling with for many years. And so that dynamic is that Hawaii is by and large a cow-calf state, which exports its commodity, which is a live calf, to the west coast of the U.S. So you think of all the ranchers in Hawaii, we manage about 1 million acres. Our product is a calf. We put that on a container ship. We send it across the Pacific Ocean, which takes about a week to get to the West Coast. And then those calves, go into other pastures and eventually into the feedlot system in the middle of the country. And Bobby was shipping cattle like his dad and granddad have been doing for generations, and saying, well, why are we exporting this amazing commodity, this amazing product, when we should be keeping it here, one, to feed ourselves, but two, because it truly is a high value commodity, especially as the market for natural grass-fed organic beef is increasing. So Bobby sort of generated this idea, and we were connected through some associates in 2014 as I was leaving business school. And we teamed up, and within a couple months, I moved out here full-time to team up with Bobby and give it a go.
Cool. So did you institute the processing, the slaughterhouse end of the chain, I guess? Is that kind of the value add there, or the?
Yeah. So definitely my background is more kind of on the business side. I do come from an agricultural family. My father, uncles, and grandfather were in citrus and sod in Florida, Christmas trees in Carolina, and one of my uncles is a rancher in Montana. So I have worked as a ranch hand. I started my career in real estate investment out of Houston, 7 years, and then I hit the eject button, applied to business schools, and then went to work on a ranch in Colorado. And that was kind of the pivot point for me. So I have enough kind of ranching background and understanding to be dangerous, but yeah, really my value, the value that I brought to the table, to the partnership, was the business, the finance, the marketing end of things.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, it's amazing how, obviously 100 years ago, most folks in this country were agriculture, and my family were chicken farmers. We had a big chicken farm in Iowa. Mm-hmm. Until my dad's generation, and then they got rid of it. Just tough business to be in, but
so it really is decades of
agriculture. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm a passionate outdoorsman, and I was working for a really fantastic international real estate investor developer. I'm working on green buildings essentially, and it was cool. It was very interesting, beautiful product. But as an outdoorsman, as an environmentalist, I really felt like my time and energy would be um, best used elsewhere. And I'm a strong advocate, or I guess a strong um, advocate for climate change solutions. And actually, the reason I got into the livestock industry professionally full time is because I had an experience in Colorado when I was working on this ranch where I realized that livestock can be used as a tool to reverse climate change, which is the antithesis of what you hear in mainstream media. But there is a remarkable natural ecological connection between grazing animals and the grasses that they consume, and how that system produces soil, which is essentially pulling carbon out of the atmosphere and depositing it into the soil layer. So there's this just kind of tremendous ecological connection, and it's increasingly important, I think, to our world where climate change is having deleterious effects on communities everywhere, but particularly coastal communities like Hawaii and Florida, where I'm from.
It's interesting because you do hear that, a pound of beef consumes so much water, grass, corn, whatever it is, and then the methane produced. I love beef. I love steak probably more than anything in the world. But sometimes I do have that little guilt about with what we're doing with it. But I guess your view is different.
Yeah, they're different production models. So by and large, what we consume as a society is industrialized agriculture, is feedlot beef. So it's concentrated animal feeding operations that are eating feed stuffs that their bodies were not designed to eat: corn, soy, wheat, and all the various byproducts from those cash crops. We do that because it's cheap to produce those crops. They're highly subsidized and they make animals fat really quickly. But it's not good for the animals. It's not good for our those environments, those communities, and that translates into lower benefits for human health. So when you look at a natural grazing system like what we do here in Hawaii, our animals are on grass for their entire lives. They're eating what their bodies were designed to eat. They're happy animals. They're healthy, and that translates all the way into the health attributes of the steak when you're enjoying that for dinner.
It's interesting. So, okay, great. Is it all being sold in Hawaii? Are you exporting it back to the US or to other countries, or what's the distribution chain look like?
Yeah, right now we've been selling meat for just under 2 years, and all of our fresh product stays here in Hawaii. Part of that is just to kind of feed our local community, but also because the logistics, you might imagine, of shipping fresh or frozen product outside of the state are complex. We do ship jerkies outside of the state to the mainland US through our sales platforms on our website and through Amazon.com.
Yeah,
but
great.
certainly our goal is to expand eastbound to California and to other kind of tier 1 cities in the next year or two. And then we also have a long-term eye to the west, to parts of Asia, where, as you probably know, the demand for proteins is spiking and doesn't look like it's going to decrease, and where we can get a serious premium for Hawaii proteins.
I was going to ask, is it sold at a pretty decent price premium to, I guess traditionally or wholesale produced beef?
It depends. So when you look at our product set on the shelf, we actually have some ground beef that is at price parity with conventional ground beef, but most of our steaks tend to be a little bit higher, 30 to 50, sometimes 100% higher than the comparable mainland product.
Yeah. And what's your capacity? Like, how you've got 2,000 head of cattle now, how big could you guys grow? I bet this is part of the pitch deck, right? Of course.
Yeah, of course. Well, so we consider ourselves in the niche meat business. So we're not trying to compete with Cargill and JBS and National Beef per se. So the scale of our business is very different. We run 2,000 head on our ranch. The state herd is approximately 70 to 80,000 mother cows. So, and as I said, we aggregate, so we can tap into that herd as we grow. The state ranching community is arguably understocked. So they're underproducing based on available land and productivity because of some of the downstream dynamics and infrastructure. So there's a lot of growth potential on the production side. We chose to get into the manufacturing part of the process because it was a bottleneck in getting our product from the ranch to the end consumer. So in late 2016, we purchased the state's largest animal harvesting facility and have since upgraded it to meet our needs. And so the processing capacity of that facility by design is about 13,000 head per year on a single working shift. So this is extremely boutique, again, as far as Cargill and Tyson are concerned, but it really maps out to a fantastic business with significant top line potential and strong returns.
Very cool. Yeah, it sounds interesting. I love Hawaii. I love beef. When I was there not too long ago, I noticed a lot of the pineapple plantations are kind of being converted, and do they even still really grow pineapples there much anymore? Is that turning into grazing land or not so much?
Yeah, so this is one of the unique opportunities of our time as livestock producers in Hawaii. Historically, most of the ag land base was cultivated for pineapple and sugarcane. There's still a very small amount of pineapple production in the state, and there is no commercial sugarcane any longer. In fact, the last large-scale cane outfit, I think they produced their last crop at the end of 2016, I want to say. So yeah, there are thousands and thousands of acres that are lying idle right now, and the only near-term and compelling use for those lands is grazing. Of course, there are a lot of landowners that are looking at biofuels and different kind of seed protein orchards and trying different things, but the only kind of proven thing that works on those lands is livestock. And of course, to my earlier point, livestock can be used to regenerate degraded landscapes. I mean, these sugarcane plantations and pineapple plantations have been monocultured for, in many cases, more than a century. So the soil is deprived of its nutrients. There's a lot of exposed soil that runs off into marine habitat. Cattle can fix all that.
Very cool. Yeah, I did a cool thing not too long ago in Maui where a buddy and I rented dirt bikes, like, motorbikes, and went up on some pretty hardcore trails up on an old a former dole plantation, just rode around.
Right
Man,
on.
it's cool. It's really fun. Very muddy.
Right.
Cool stuff. All right. So how much have you guys raised? Let's talk about financing this interesting business.
We're right at about $5 million in total equity raised to date, and that's across 2.5 rounds. We started in 2015 with a seed round of $150K, and that was my impetus to move here from the East Coast, where I was working as an ag consultant. And then over the course of really 2016 into the first 2 months of 2018, we closed $3.3 million on our A round. And and now we're in a convertible round.
So let's talk about, I guess, the seed and A. The business was already existing, and then you come on and maybe tell us about kind of how you raised that. Was it angels? Was it VCs? Do VCs play in this space? What was Yeah.
So qualification, the part of the business that existed was that my partner had cow-calf operations on leased land. And so that was our kind of operating foundation, but we had to put together everything else downstream, which was a total kind of reconstruction. So the seed round was really used to kind of fund the ground truthing of our business plan. We received half of those seed monies from a local accelerator called Elemental Accelerator, which is actually now partnered with Emerson Collective, Miss Jobs Foundation in Palo Alto. And they have just been a tremendous supporter connector. They've actually invested equity in the A round. And so that's how we got our start, testing our business model, talking to chefs and grocers and testing our assumptions. And once we finished our customer discovery process, we launched our A round kind of mid to end of 2015. And that was a brutal process for several reasons. But some of the kind of high level challenges raising capital for this business is, one, we consider ourselves a social enterprise, right? We have a very strong social environmental mission.
Mm-hmm.
And we also consider ourselves a really compelling kind of financial opportunity. But anytime you say social environmental enterprise, you automatically sort of get, put off to one side by a certain investor group. So that was, I think, one sort of disadvantage, but that's very important to us. So we do put it out front. Another challenge is that being based in Hawaii, we fall out of scope naturally for many investors, particularly VCs and funds, institutional investors that have a defined geographic scope.
Sure.
So when they hear Hawaii, they think, oh, I rode dirt bikes on Maui there and it was awesome, but I didn't see a single business worth getting involved in.
Yeah.
So they don't generally think of it as a place to do business, or they think of it as a small market.
Yep.
And then I think probably the most challenging part of our pitch in general is that we're vertically integrated.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a very complex chain model, and most investors have specific expertise. Sometimes that's in land-based enterprises like agricultural production. Sometimes it's in manufacturing and operations, and sometimes it's in consumer goods, but it's generally not all three. So a lot of people look at our model and they say, well, first, you're trying to bite off too much. And secondly, if we actually thought you could pull it off, I don't understand it all.
Mm.
So that made it really difficult to find aligned investors. And where we ended up succeeding was primarily with high net worth individuals who are interesting, successful, sophisticated investors by and large. They're hedge fund managers and mutual fund managers and grocery CEOs and food CEOs that have some kind of connection to our work. And that's either climate change or grass-fed beef, or they spent their summers in Hawaii as a kid and they just really love the place. So that's kind of where we found our success.
So how did you identify? Because this is, an interesting dynamic. Anyone who has got kind of a niche, I won't call you a niche business, but a off the traditional path business, I think often struggles with, like, how do I identify these investors? So how'd you identify the high net worth folks, and, talk about the sourcing and process?
Sure. Our process was pretty unstructured. I mean, this is the first time I've ever done this, so I can't say I had a playbook per se. And we've got some amazing entrepreneurial, successful business people on our team, but I don't think they've necessarily gone through the same process, and they had their own things going on. So I started with just my personal network, which I had cultivated in business school in the impact investor space. I was very involved in the impact investing programs and entrepreneurship programs at Duke University, Fuqua School of Business, and also the Nicholas School of the Environment, where I got a master's of environment. So given that was kind of my niche and interest, and I really felt like there was a tight fit with Kunoa's mission and business model, that's where I started. And I had a pretty deep book in that arena, which is in and of itself pretty small, but I pushed hard into those relationships and was very discouraged that I came up with nothing.
Oh, interesting.
and so I have a lot. We could probably do a whole nother podcast on impact investing, which is a nascent space. I think it's maturing a lot, but I quickly realized that was not going to work for us. So I tried the VCs and I tried some private equity shops and some strategics. And when we started the A round, we had nothing. We had nothing other than a couple leases with cows that we didn't even own. And we had a contract to buy the state's largest animal harvesting facility. But we didn't have a business, no revenue, no POs, none of that stuff. So the VCs and the PEs would pat us on the back for, doing something cool in Hawaii, but they wouldn't take more than a 15-minute phone call, really. So, how did we end up with these individuals? It was primarily just kind of word of mouth networking and hitting the pavement, building relationships with people in Hawaii and then also on the mainland.
How are you finding them though? Were you identifying, executives at Kroger or grocery chains and networking your way into meetings with them, or was it just kind of friend of a friend of a friend that was, how were you doing it?
The latter. It was way more reactive than proactive. It was super just needle in a haystack kind of thing. You are just asking your friends and associates and colleagues, who can you connect me to? And you talk to those people and you get another couple of names and connections. And that was how I did it. And I actually, think that's a pretty reasonable and important way to go through this process, even if you do have a more structured, search process where you're pulling databases and categorizing names. But that's how we succeeded. And it took us a hell of a lot longer than we wanted it to take us.
How long to take?
Well, it took us from October of 2016 to February of 2018, from our first closing to our last closing in the A round. So that's super extended. And of course, we were trying to raise capital for the A round like a year before we had our first closing. So it was unbelievably extended, and that may be as much a reflection on the failure in my process as it is, the success.
So were you doing kind of a rolling close? Was this a note that you were working on?
It was an A round. We're an LLC, and so we were taking preferred equity investors in on our operating agreement, the A round, but we had authorization up to $5 million. So yeah, it was rolling.
So you're selling, just for people kind of getting a little bit on the technical side, but it's an LLC, so you're selling up to $5 million of LLC units, right?
On the A round, that's correct. And so ultimately, after a certain period of time, we decided to close the A round. That was February 2018, and we closed it even though we really hadn't met our full capitalization target. We closed it because we had made so much progress in between. I mean, we were using what little capital we had gotten kind of incrementally, drip, 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 to buy the animal harvesting facility, to upgrade it, to hire people, to, develop product, all that stuff that you need to do in between. And the composition of our business was completely different at that point in time than it was at the beginning. And we felt like an adjustment valuation was merited.
Are you willing to share? So it was up to $5 million at a certain valuation. Was it the same valuation throughout the?
It was. The pre-money was set at about $7 million, and so we had,
That makes sense. So your business has gotten more valuable, so you want to close it out, and so you can raise another round at a higher valuation, less dilution. How'd you get the first guy or gal to write a check? Like that first person who finally said, yes, okay, fine. Here's my,
Yeah, that was, oh my gosh. Well, we had a couple false starts with other investor groups, which we can get into if you're interested. But the first real check we got was a hui, as we say in Hawaii, a consortium of investors that came in at the same time. And it was really important to each of those individuals that there be at least, a few other guys and gals coming in at that sort of on that tranche.
Yeah.
Because they knew that we were in a capital intensive business, and getting 10% of the capital we need is not going to do anything other than help them lose money faster. So we put together, it was about $2 million in October of 2016. And we felt like that was enough to close on the acquisition of the animal harvesting facility, make some essential upgrades, and kind of get going, and build some momentum to then pull some more money through the door. And so the set of individuals that we put together, we had cultivated over many, many months. And a couple of the guys had come out and visited the ranch and visited the facility and kind of pressed the flesh. And some of those guys, after having done that, brought in some of their associates who did a much lighter diligence. And it all kind of came together then in October.
Did you set a closing date? Like, hey, we've got enough people around the table. We're going to have this first tranche closing. Because that's always the hard part too, is the catalyst to finally get all these people who are interested, but they want to see who else is interested. like making that catalyst is hard. Yeah.
That's, I mean, I've definitely had board members and investors encourage us to set hard timelines. And I feel like that has been very difficult for us to do. We've tried it in a couple of cases and it hasn't produced the decisions that we had wanted.
Yeah.
So I generally feel like in our process, we've been more successful having an intimate one-on-one discussion and frequent set of conversations with the investor to feel them out and understand what their decision points are.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't, we're not in a business where, you know, all the VCs are, you know, glomming onto us because we have this amazing technology. We're like in this sort of archaic industry in a weird place of the world. And so we don't have kind of this critical mass of investors to build that perceived pressure and urgency.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we've had to approach it a little differently.
Yeah. You mentioned there was a false start or two in there. Maybe got a story to tell about that?
Oh yeah. Yeah, this is probably should be a book someday, but we developed a relationship through the ranching industry with a group of entrepreneurs in the Rocky Mountain West. These are guys who've been very, very successful in another sector, and it was kind of tangentially related to our business. And they were also involved, as many people are in Idaho, in the agriculture business in some way, shape, or form. And so we got a window to pitch them, and we started a conversation remotely over many weeks, and they showed interest. And then we eventually flew out there to Idaho, and we sat in their office, and we pitched them I tried to pitch them the business actually, and they really wouldn't even let me pitch. It was a very odd meeting. But by the end of the afternoon, they had verbally committed to funding our entire A round. And they also operated an industrial bank, which could provide different forms of credit financing for, you know, like working capital financing. And we thought, man, this is just the perfect partnership. They've got the equity to cover the entire round. They're smart entrepreneurs. They are somewhat involved in agriculture. They have this other kind of interesting tangential logistics piece they do. And so we walked out of that meeting with, you know, huge smiles on our faces and high hopes. And unfortunately, over many, many months, what happened is they strung us out. And realizing that we had very little cash reserves in our bank, they strung us out. They tried to recut the deal 2 or 3 times. They tried to get me fired. And they had a very odd investment structure that they proposed, which was different from our initial offering. But they kind of put us in a really terrible corner, and we didn't quite know how to get out of it. Ultimately, we were able to, with the earnest money that they had advanced us, use that to generate enough new interest from other prospective investors. And after about a year, recapitalize, clean them off of our balance sheet, pay them back in full for what was effectively an earnest money loan, and start over. So the beauty is that we extricated ourselves with nothing more than, I guess, emotional scars. The pain is that it took us an extra year to get down the line. We lost a year.
What do you think was the reason? What are the learnings from that, or what have you sort of taken away other than, you know, yeah.
Well, I think, you know, naivete is one. My partner and I had never gone through a raise of this kind before. We were dealing with much more, quote unquote, successful, seasoned entrepreneurs, investors. They had a lot of money. You know, from the outside looking in, it looked like a great partnership. They checked many of the boxes. I think we probably could have done more research on the group to understand the reputation in the community. We could have talked to other entrepreneurs they dealt with. And, you know, I think that it's certainly one argument to try to diversify your investor pool so that you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. Sometimes that works really well when you work it out with a great aligned investor, and other times, you know, you want to have a little fit more people on the cap table. But those are, I mean, just kind of keeping my eyes open wider, not counting the chickens until they hatch, and doing more due diligence, I think, are the takeaways.
Did you, in hindsight, did you learn that they did this was sort of their modus operandi or MO of kind of stringing a deal along and recutting it, or is this maybe specific to you guys? Do you have any sense for that?
We didn't get any specific answers.
Yeah.
You know, I never really understood why they tried to get me fired, but that was hurtful. I mean, it was really, really painful for me to go through that process. But yeah, and I think in the end, we just determined that these guys are not straight shooters, and this is kind of their process. This is how they do it. This is how they get an advantage in their deals.
Yeah.
So we're good riddance.
I've heard of that a little bit with like private equity firms. I knew a colleague who worked at one, and I won't name the name, but they would go in, they would kind of lock in terms on a deal, and then in due diligence, of course, they would find things purposely to kind of after the deal was like locked up and there weren't other competing, parties for it, they kind of renegotiated based on the things, of course, they were going to find, or they knew they were going to find. Tricky approach. I don't like it. And then how did you pay them back, or how did you get them off the cap table? Because that's tricky, right? If I don't know, any story?
Well, yeah, no, that was tough because like we were like, how are we going to raise new capital? I mean, it was almost $1 million that we took from them in earnest money. How are we going to raise the capital we need for our A round to fully capitalize this business and pay these guys back? And we had burned, a certain amount of cash just going through that process. So we obviously had to be very transparent with our new investors in those mechanics. And fortunately, we were able to, craft a really compelling story for the prospects of the company in spite of that hiccup in the road. And ultimately, I guess that there was enough confidence there to put forward that money plus the additional monies that we needed to fund the rest of the business.
Again, a little technical, but had that earnest money, I'm actually not familiar with that term very much. Was that purchasing LLC units, or was that more of a loan that you could pay back?
It was treated as a loan in the documentation, which was very thin. And I mean, the documentation was a little tricky. In the end, it kind of fell in our favor because it was so thin and weak. But we just treated it like a no interest loan for a year.
And were they happy to be paid back, or were they?
The check got cashed. We never heard anything from them at the time, but they have come back to Hawaii for family vacations, and we've had a little bit of interaction with them, and it's been collegial, and life goes on.
You send them a pack of beef jerky each Christmas and get on with life. Good.
Right.
Yeah. This is not on the nearly same scale, but we hired a PR firm, and I gave them like a couple % equity because they were giving us a sweetheart deal, and they turned out to be a disaster. So getting them off our cap table it's a pain when you want to get people off your cap table, and people have to really be conscious of that, I think, going into any deal, right?
For sure.
Yeah. Cool. Good stuff. Well, maybe, I don't know. Let's just go back to the present, the future/present. You're raising a B round now. What are you doing differently? How's all these lessons learned impacting or changing how you're raising money now? What are you doing?
So one of our handicaps in the fundraising process is that we just have a lot going on. We have a very complicated business. And really, if you look at our business, we're 3 businesses in one. I mean, typically, if you look at our sector on the mainland, you have ranchers that are discrete businesses. You have packing facilities, discrete businesses, and you have brands. But when we started this outfit in Hawaii, the infrastructure was underdeveloped, so we had to do all of them. Yep. So we've been trying to start, manage, and grow 3 businesses at the same time, and raise money along the way. And so I have been just stretched way too thin, and I think less successful in each of those areas: driving sales, organizational design, fundraising, which is all the stuff that I'm responsible for as CEO. Been less effective because I'm stretched so thin. I know every entrepreneur can make that argument, and it's true. But what we've done more recently is we've reached a level of sort of operating maturity where we've hired some new people to manage different components of the business. And I've actually transitioned into a full-time fundraising capacity that's allowing me to focus exclusively on closing the balance of our convertible note round and moving into a B round. And I can't tell you how much this has helped the process just in terms of coming up with a fundraising plan, identifying the tools that I need, and more than anything, I think having the time to follow up on conversations. It was so easy to start conversations and generate initial leads, a year, 2 years ago, but I'd forget about them. I wouldn't circle back. So with a little more structure and time to focus, I think we can be more effective in closing on better terms and closing more quickly.
I think that's great. So that's great. Any other things there? I mean, or kind of tips, being able to focus full time, follow up on conversations, other things you're doing differently or better this time around. What else?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're a little bit smarter in terms of who we're talking to. So, for example, we've got about $1 million left in our convertible note round that I'm trying to close at the moment, and I'm not really bothering with the VCs and the PEs or the angel investors, really, for that matter, with that slug. I'm going to high net worth individuals. Again, we've been most successful there. If you look at the kind of checks that we're trying to find, it's minimum 100 up to 500, 800 $1,000. So there's a particular audience that I'm trying to reach there. So how do I find that those people? Again, it's through networking, but it's also through different channels like wealth managers and CPAs and attorneys. It might be super angel groups, things like that. But I'm focused less at the moment on the VC and private equity relationships, although I'm still opening those doors to try to seed conversations and build rapport as we move into the B round.
Maybe give a little more insight, going through like wealth managers, CPAs, attorneys. Are you like cold emailing attorneys saying, this is what we're doing, we're looking for investors? I don't know. How are you working that funnel?
Well, yeah, I try not to do that too much because I don't feel like that's a terribly successful strategy. I mean, I do it a little bit, but you have to have some kind of icebreaker or connection to get a serious audience. What I found with wealth managers is that the major institutional wirehouses, they have such strict regulatory policies that oftentimes they can't entertain direct investments. So you're really kind of dealing with the independents. Sometimes even those folks that work for the big wirehouses, they will make referrals, which can be helpful. And then like here in Hawaii, you try to find attorneys and CPAs that work with large food businesses or related industries that might know people that have some kind of connection to our work that I can latch onto and use that to create an icebreaker to open up the door.
Yeah. Very cool.
I'm also, as I look east to the mainland for these raises, I'm focusing on agricultural communities and food bev communities. So you think about like Central Valley, California, parts of Texas, Chicago being a major kind of food CPG nexus, California, that kind of thing.
Don't reach out to Chicago right now. They're all depressed because their kicker lost the playoff game.
Okay, good tip.
Or maybe an idea of investing in Hawaii and having a reason is perfect.
You need a vacation.
Yeah. Here's one little tip, a little bit shameless plug, but we just I think today or tomorrow or in the next couple of days releasing about 20,000 more investors in our database and founder suite. So look around like family offices. There's a category for that, or I think there's a registered investment advisor category. If you just look under type, you might find some folks to hunt.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, let me add on to that comment with just some positive feedback on Founder Suite. I've really enjoyed using the tool. It's been simple to use. It's been fun to use the board and to kind of move folks through the game. It's challenged me. It's held me accountable. So that's been really fun. One other kind of shifting back to your other question, one of the other interesting development, I feel like in my particular niche, which is sort of impact investing, social environmental enterprise, is it seems like there are more tools coming available to tap into the philanthropic space. So, there are a lot of foundations whose missions line up with my mission, which is to transform our food system. And typically they cannot invest, or they're loath to invest in for-profit enterprises because of tax constraints, which there are ways to do it, but they're complicated and they can kind of put the nonprofit at risk sometimes. So there's just a lot of trepidation there. But there are new tools that allow foundations or individuals to make philanthropic donations to nonprofit entities that would invest in startups like mine. And so these are sort of donor advised funds that the philanthropist can direct an equity investment through that fund to the startup. And then when there's a return, a coupon, a distribution, an exit, whatever, comes back to the nonprofit fund, that philanthropist can then direct those funds to reinvest in another startup, or they can go out into the nonprofit world. So just really interesting tools that I'm learning about and pursuing at the moment.
Any names that come to mind if people are interested in that they can research or check out?
Yeah, I've come to learn that there are a couple of independent kind of wealth managers that are putting together their own funds along these lines. But I think one of the leaders in the space is a company called Impact Assets. And they've been doing various forms of impact investing for a long time. And it was several years ago that they launched this particular strategy. And apparently it's grown, really significantly in the last couple of years. I just learned about it. And I have one current investor who is interested in investing through this tool. So making a philanthropic donation and kind of leading other investors into that same vehicle. So I'm trying to use her offer as a tactic to get more interest from folks that are looking for the tax deduction. And
you sort of mentioned it, but it's donors will make a donation to a fund, and then that fund is able to invest. That's how it works?
Yeah, that fund is a nonprofit entity. So that's how the philanthropist can get the deduction. And then that entity, it's an investment fund. So it can make an equity or debt investment into ABC startup. And it just has certain requirements that when it achieves a return, it can do certain things with those funds.
I've never heard of this ever before, so this is great. Learn something every day. Love it. Cool. Great. Well, anything else we haven't covered? Any other lessons learned or tips or any, feedback, or have we pretty much covered everything today?
Yeah, it's been a great conversation. Thanks for having us on. I think one of the things that has been the most challenging for me through this process is just what every CEO faces, which is maintaining your composure. Mm-hmm. The highs are so, just elixir, and the lows are so depressing and so difficult. Mm-hmm. So it takes a lot of a very strong constitution to hold it all together, and it takes a lot of support and resilience. You have to focus on your psychological health. You have to maintain your relationships. If I had to do it all over again, I would try to reduce the complexity in my business. I would follow the age-old principle of keep it simple. The complexity of my business is actually what makes it compelling. But I think there would have been another way to kind of work into that long-term market opportunity through more simple steps along the way. So that's my advice to myself the next time I try something like this. But I think when you're trying to change a system, when you're trying to transform a food system that is dysfunctional and has all kinds of negative externalities and perverse incentives like subsidies, and when the market is controlled by 4 huge companies, you can't expect that to happen overnight. So, I think it's worth it in the end.
Very interesting. Well, very cool. And I do appreciate the little plug there for Founder Suite. That's always appreciated. If people want to learn more, it's just kunoa.com or some other website.
Yeah, kunoacattle.com. I would encourage you to log on to shop.kunoacattle.com and check out our beef jerky products. We can ship to your door within a couple of days via USPS. Get some
What
high
flavors do you
quality.
have?
Yeah, so we've got an original flavor for our beef bar, which is a 1 ounce beef snack. It's ground beef that's seasoned and smoked. It has 9 grams of protein and only 50 calories. It's a really healthy snack. And for those of you who have tried sort of the keto paleo options on the shelf, we get really good feedback that it's so much better and cleaner than many of the leading products that are owned by the CPG companies. We also provide a traditional beef jerky, which is like a sliced whole muscle cut that's seasoned with salt and pepper, organic spices. So you can find both of those on shop.kunoacattle.com. And follow us on Instagram at Kunoa Cattle, and you can see photos and videos of our herds grazing, free roaming in pasture, beautiful Kauai pastures. You can see our butchers at work in the processing facility, and you can see the chefs preparing amazing dishes. So when you come to Hawaii, ask for Kunoa and look us up. We'd love to say hello.
That sounds great. I think I'm coming in February, so I'll definitely be a customer.
Right on.
Awesome, Jack. Thank you so much. Well, good luck, and keep up the good work, and we'll talk to you after you close your next round. How about that?
All right, Nathan. Aloha.
Aloha. Mahalo. Cheers.
Mahalo nui.
All right.